Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for the organization to invite me for this talk about ecosystem, European and international ecosystem with regards to AI development and policy. The audience know how impactful is AI and machine learning techniques and algorithm in our society, in our economy. So I'm not going to explain these points here, but in fact, the main thing is that we used to say there is a lot of data everywhere. What we were missing to say is that algorithms are also everywhere. So algorithms making sense and value from data are everywhere, in all application domains, in all, in fact, really, they are pervasive. This kind of in fact, a really generalization of the use of data and algorithm, which is really very important and provide a lot of opportunities for humans and for society, because today AI technologies are real opportunities since humans could not deal with such amount of data. So definitely AI is essential. In the same time, we should not be naive with regards to opportunity and limits. And also, in fact, my point here is to be very careful to avoid maybe a second or a third winter of AI. So we need to be also very careful with regards to trust and transparency, because these are questions, in fact, that arise and let's say animate some debates. My point here with regards to trust and transparency is from the competitiveness point of view. Okay, so it's really important. Trust make people deploy the AI services. And what I call transparency is more generally is to reduce, in fact, the asymmetry of information between service provider and service consumer. And when I talk about service consumer, this doesn't mean citizens, but also include professionals when they are customer of other professionals. That means B2B also, that includes the B2B case. But again, it could include governments when they are client of other professional services. And when we are in the B2B case, we are more facing competitiveness, but also competition may be fair or unfair in the B2B case when there is no transparency. And in the case of lack of transparency and trust, when the government is the client, we may face a sovereignty issue. So this is to really provide a broader view about transparency and trust. So it's not only about B2C and civil rights, etc., but it can really concern different layers of what we call consumer of digital services. I will now on talk about algorithmic systems, meaning data and algorithm, because most of the time we consider transparency, trust of algorithm, but it's very important, in fact, to see and to consider that in such questions, it's very important to consider transparency and trust within data. Data usage control, which kind of data? Algorithmic system, what I mentioned here are data and algorithm. So with regards to recommender system, search engines, but also credit scoring, I mean, there is a lot of situation where we use and we need algorithm. In fact, the question here is about moving of data analytics from description of the past, I mean from predictive analytics to prescriptive analytics. That means recommender system sometimes, in fact, became prescriber of content consumption. Let's take the example of cultural content consumption. We may have several services that may recommend for you, okay, if this content is, you have see this video, then this video should interest you. Or you may be interested with this one. And most of the time, in fact, there is no question. We may have quite, okay, I mean, we are consuming, in fact, more and more content that which is recommended by algorithm. And in this regard, I mean, people from cultural content industry may be, okay, we may have questions here in terms of competition, why this content is recommended, and more generally about neutrality of this recommender system. Neutrality, but also whether the recommended item is really personalized and provide personalized services, whether it is optimizing other criteria that we have no information about them. So this is some examples about transparency, but in the same time, my point here is that law is not the solution. So we don't need, this is my personal opinion, we do not need more policy and more regulation, etc. Because we know already, and the example about consent is not new. It's already a right about consent, okay, your personal information, nobody can use it, etc., etc. I mean, it's not new. But in real world, we do not have any, let's say, proof that our consent is really respected, is really taken into account through algorithm approaches such information flow monitoring, for instance. A study has been conducted together with regulation authority, with a research group about monitoring and watching input data, output data, and system calls for a given piece of software. And the result, in fact, make objective the fact that whatever the answer of the user, yes, I agree to share my, let's say, GPS position. No, I do not agree to share my GPS position. These information flow monitoring approaches shows that, in fact, whatever the answer is, your personal information, in fact, was used by the piece of software. The law is not the ultimate solution. My point here is that algorithms are also part of the solution. We need to develop AI and algorithm to monitor the behavior of other algorithms and to empower people and society with such approaches to provide the auditability of algorithm. For several other examples, what we can see is that, for example, for credit scoring or predictive justice, predictive analytics, first, they are learning from past data. Also for credit scoring, when we need to train the algorithm for credit scoring, we provide learning data. So in this regard, the opinion of developers, in fact, of people who are developing software are encapsulated in these piece of software, in these algorithms. So we need to take it into account. At the same time, there is a study that have been showing that for credit scoring, for instance, there is a new discrimination between people who knows how the algorithm work and people who do not know how the algorithm works. So, I mean, people who know, in fact, they manage to finally keep all the digital traces so that they maximize the credit scoring index. But for the same solvability situation, we can have other persons who use, let's say, bank services with no idea how these credit scoring are computed. And we may have different scores for two persons in the same situation. So I mention here with new discrimination between those who know how algorithms work and those who do not. In the computer vision, in fact, community, we have more interpretability of what comes out from, I mean, object recognition. And sometimes we realize that we are not building the model of the object to recognize, but we are building the context of the object. Two examples, when I talk about safe AI meaning robustness and explanation. For this example, when we visualize the explanation of the recognition rate, we see exactly what I was saying. That means variables that explain our recognition rate are more related to the background rather than the object to recognize. So we need to be very careful. I mean, in computer vision, the intelligibility of results is easy, but in other situations, when we have just table of figures, it's not that easy to make this interpretation and realize what's going on precisely. For the second example about robustness, of course, you know already that deep learning, I mean, achieve very big breakthrough in terms of performance. And also benchmarking campaigns show that it outperforms even the capabilities of human to recognize objects. This is true, I mean, this is established. But in the same time, experiments showing that, I mean, the vulnerability of deep learning to hear white noise with very, very low, I mean, it's about 0.007 maybe of this white noise here. Human eyes still recognize that it is a panda, but through deep learning algorithm, I mean, the recognition is completely out of the scope. So, in fact, we need to really measure and take into account the opportunities and limitation in the same time. We need, in fact, to master the robustness of AI deployment. It's more important in this kind of thing with regards to today, more and more machine learning libraries are open source, and it's more about reusing of existing software rather than designing from scratch. So it's very important to take into account all these considerations. Two very brief insight about algorithmic system bias. When we talk about data and algorithm, with regards to data, of course, we need to be very careful in terms of representativeness of data with regards to the problem to be solved, but also how data are selected to really solve the situation. So it's not only about, okay, I have some data, I will put it inside and that's it. So reusing and this kind of carefulness of reusing and of deployment of AI technology, in fact, we need to readapt training programs to this issue. So, okay, we have different sources of bias here: incompleteness, incorrectness, outdated. With regards to algorithm, of course, we could have poorly designed algorithm, but in the same time, we have confusions most of the time between correlation and causation, which is, I mean, we need also here to develop more causality models rather than correlation, which can be sometimes not meaningful. So we have, in fact, different ways to face, in fact, and to develop trusted AI. We can consider developing of new generation of algorithm, of mathematical models, which are transparent by design. We can embed, I mean, equity by design. That means we can identify discriminatory variables and reduce the impact of these variables on building the decision frontier. So it's about building new models. And another way of mastering here the accuracy and robustness of big data and AI techniques, robustness with regards to bias, diversion, corruption, but also reproducibility, which is an issue. It's really important. And when we talk about a trusted AI, in fact, I prefer to talk about responsible AI rather than ethical AI or whatever, because sometimes we have unintentional discrimination because, in fact, it's only due to lack of mastering AI technology deployment, and there is no intent to cause harm for people. So the point here, so trusted AI, responsible AI, that means compliance with regulation and policy, compliance with social values and ethics, but also robustness and safety. Safety in terms of examples that I mentioned just before, against bias, corruption, noise, and reproducibility. Auditability by design, responsible by design conception, which is very important, really to empower people, society, and industries. And it's our duty as research and innovation community. So it's not only about research community, also industry community, which are in real life, service providers, need also to work together with academia, and that's why it's very important to support the public-private partnership in this regard. I was saying that AI is part of the solution, not only the law, also to have this empowerment, in fact, through algorithmic tools, providing the monitoring of the behavior of AI technologies, in terms of also robustness and safety. Governance of data is key. When we talk about governance of AI, governance of data is key. As I was saying, machine learning are shared in open source, but not data. Data are the assets. So we need to consider the overall context and not only the algorithm. I would point out the Cloud Act, which has nothing to do with cloud computing. It is abbreviation of Clarifying Lawful Overseas Use of Data Act, which reduces a lot the impact of GDPR. That's why law is not the solution. So AI is really a great part of the solution. Let me jump to the international ecosystem. At the European level, European Commission is considering also to really have impact on policy and investment through a high-level expert group. The composition 52 experts, computer science, law, ethicist, philosopher, entrepreneur. In fact, it's really representative of the society, finally, as a consumer association, academia, and industry. To support the European AI strategy, here's the agenda. There has been a very important meeting very recently in Helsinki between this independent high-level expert group and an AI expert group of member states to align the vision and the strategy between member states and this high-level expert group. There is another important deadline, which is the first deliverable about trusted AI orientation guidelines. And in fact, here we are considering to establish core values and principles. And then once we have these core values and principles, also recommend the way of implementation of trusted AI through responsible and robust AI in terms of how could we develop such approaches. And when dealing with core values and principles, together with how to implement trusted AI, we will point out policy, but also will issues, but also will point out research and innovation issues. And the outcome is a comprehensive list of, list of guidelines based on use cases to really be very concrete in terms of guidelines. Of course, we are also considering impacts and enablers and making priorities within these metrics with regards to these two dimensions of enablers and impact. The OECD also has built and set up an AI expert group. They're representative of all members of OECD, the equivalent of DGE in France, for instance, but also including experts from MIT, Harvard, INRIA, and IEEE. And there is an expected report on November 2019, also to align understanding of what is needed. In fact, meaning that it's not only an issue which is handled only in the European Union, but also at the international level, because digital services do not know boundaries.
Thank you very much. Thank you.